we have to talk about consciousness. Our life is actually a midpoint between the two deaths. To use the sexual energy in order to achieve enlightenment. The three-dimensional spiral shape encoded in our DNA, in our biology.
Hello everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of the Discomfort-Zone podcast. We're here again, a new week, a new episode, and I'm excited because this week we actually go back to our main narrative with Drunvalo, and we'll continue where we left off. I'm so happy to see you in chat, Revised Sociology. Great to see you here as always. I'm glad to hear that things are going well on the land. And Rondon, as always, a pleasure to see you as well. So the last few episodes, 3 episodes actually, we sort of went off topic on some random ramble that I felt the need to share, but it was unrelated, more or less, to the other narrative that we're talking about, sacred geometry. But today, we are back on topic. We're getting back to things, and we'll see how we go. It is. It was raining all day today here. I'm very pleased because 2 days ago, I actually officially finished closing up the teepee for the rain and being able to do the smoke flaps and the rain caps. So we're prepared. We'll see how it actually holds up. This is the first rain. We're actually going to have the teepee standing, so we'll see tomorrow. But it was a crazy amount of rain today. I'm very pleased because we're going to be working on the land soon to finish off the floor. So the land was getting very dry, the earth. So it's much harder to dig. So this is going to be great. Yes. Well, I know. I actually checked the weather to see when the rain was coming because I knew it was basically just open, had a huge hole in the top. So I wanted to cover it up in time. If there's one thing I've learned about Portugal, that the weather can be very fickle and very quick to change. So it's nice. It's nice to be connected to them, and I have to say I'm glad it's raining. It's always wonderful. But none of that has anything to do with this week's episode. And this week we're actually continuing from where we were left off, 4 episodes ago. So for those who don't remember, which I would imagine some of you may not, we were talking about the different shapes, the different geometric patterns that consciousness made when it first was, quote unquote, creating or beginning the universe, reality, creation as we know it. And so we went through the various shapes, beginning with the perfect sphere, the line, and then another sphere from that center, etc., etc. And we finally ended with this Genesis pattern, which was the first pattern of the 4 that we've spoken of, the geometric patterns of sort of life. So the seed of life, the tree of life, the flower of life, and the seed of life. We're going to be going back to some of that today. I will give a reminder and an introduction to those who are hearing this for the first time, but we're not going to dwell on it too much. So if you want to hear more, you can go check out the older episodes, or you can always go to the source and read the book or check up online on these subjects. There's a lot of information today and a lot of great sources, indeed, much more skilled than I am. I'm here to share my narrative, or the way I understand Drunvalo's narrative, I should say. Oh, and Archangel Gabriel, welcome. A pleasure to have you here. We're just in time. So, following those patterns in the Genesis pattern, one of the things sort of we talked about, and this is not just the pattern for the creation of the universe, and it's not just the pattern that the Egyptians studied for its historical sense, but this is actually the same pattern that happens at the genesis of life on the individual level as well. And so in the book, Drunvalo goes to a lot of extent in explaining and talking about this process. And the issue with it, or not the issue, but just for me, is that it's a very visual art. And obviously, There are many images in the books, and I'm going to be mentioning some of these shapes for those who are interested. You can always look online and check them out. But because this is a podcast, because this is an audio medium, at least partially, then I do want it to be also available for those who are just listening and not watching any video version of the podcast, which is available for those who want. So, we're going to be talking about some of these shapes, and we're going to explain the process, and it will be slightly less apparent or convincing because it's in a visual, but you can trust me and go along with it. And if you want, you can check it out later, or just think that I'm making it up. It's all good. But yeah, this is following the last episodes about narrative. Nothing here is absolute science. These are all perspectives, and enjoy it. That's all we're here for. So, with that very long-winded introduction, let's actually get down to it. Now, what we're talking about here, which is a subject that Drunvalo mentions a lot, and indeed, for me personally, the idea of sacred geometry was much more enticing and more profound when I could see it in my everyday life and see it in actual practical reality. Sorry, my microphone seems to be playing a bit. Sorry. Is that okay? Okay, I think we're back. Sorry about that. And so these instances of sacred geometry, obviously you can see them in Greek architecture or in artistic expressions, or, when you're studying like this very theoretical, abstract perception of what consciousness could have been like when it created reality. But here we come on the subject of literal biology and, science. And within that science and math, there is a form of geometry which is very famous and is very known. These are not things that are sacred in the terms that they have been hidden. The geometric sort of application in biology is obviously something that has been studied for a long, long time and is well documented. But it's not always perceived with the same, magical air that I might perceive it, or that others who are interested in spirituality. For the scientific, let's say, community, it's always a question of evolution. And these systems have sort of developed or come out because they are the best, the most efficient, the most sort of long-lasting, robust systems, and that's why nature has decided to do it this way. And so, that's obviously one perspective, and it's all good. Oh, hey, vaccines cause avian flu. I didn't see you. As always, welcome. Great to have you on. We have see a few people. PZ and Raymond Speaks. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Oh, wow. Very exciting. So, within the field of biology, there is a sequence, a series, a mathematical series, which is very famous to all of us, which is the binary series. Sorry. And we've spoken about binary system for many different episodes in many different aspects. But obviously, in the case of biology, this is the way biology acts, biology grows, it reproduces, as it were. Well, I'm glad to see you here anyway, Raymond Speaks, and I hope you enjoy it more than having the gun to your head. Oh, and Zika, welcome. I couldn't see you. Oh, I see. You're tuned in. Well, it's great to have you here as well, nonetheless. Welcome one and all. Yes, a pleasure. So, within the binary system, this is obviously the way cells reproduce is by halving them or multiplying, copying themselves twice, whatever you want to say, it's splitting, etc. And so 1 to 2 to 4 to 8, etc., is the same system that every single cell in our, let's say, known biological system acts. This seems to be a rule. It obviously makes sense because we wouldn't imagine splitting a cell into 3 being as simple as splitting it into 2. And there's obviously this is sort of the simplest method that you can get to very, very large numbers very quickly. So that mathematical system, that binary system, is one of these aspects of science looking into biology. And within sacred geometry, we're going to be focusing on obviously what's relevant to us. And because of this, it's related directly to the patterns and shapes that we spoke about when consciousness sort of moves through the cycle. And so if we think of it this in the same way, now here we're going to be imagining just a little bit. But again, if you want, these are actually the shapes that we've spoken about last time. These are three-dimensional shapes, all of them, because once again, we're talking about biology. So this is no longer just the representation, but it's the actual pictures, and you can see images of this. But basically, when we start out, we are, a cell, let's say. It starts out as a sphere. And that sphere, the egg, then divides into two and then divides into two again. And within these four circles that have now been created, they are joined together in a very specific way, right? So if you can imagine, and this is where we have to use our imagination just a little bit, but there's a certain way that you can array these four um, cells, not cells, but cells, four parts. And any way that you arrange it, you can then look at it from a different perspective. And so you can look at it from the three-dimensional, from the three-dimensional perspective, or you can look at it from the two-dimensional perspective. So when we have these four cells, they actually form in a way where you could connect the centers of each of the spheres, and then you would be forming a triangle or a three-dimensional pyramid. Now, if we look at this three-dimensional pyramid from a certain side, from a certain perspective, it will be the same pyramid, the tetrahedron, that we saw when we connected the circles in our first four circles when we looked through the spheres of consciousness, of the motions of consciousness. So once again, we started off with a circle, and once that circle splits into two and another two, we now have four circles that are sort of connected together. And when we look at it from a certain perspective, if you imagine them one on top of each other, forming a perfect cube, that would be one perspective. But if you then twisted that cube, as it were, you could look at it from the diagonal, and then you would see this triangle, this pyramid, basically. Now, from this pyramid, once you split them all again, you get 8. And with this 8, you can actually look at it from a perspective to get that interlocked tetrahedrons, which means if you connect the centers of each of the spheres once again, you would get two pyramids inverted inside each other, which once again as a two-dimensional representation is the Star of David, what's known as that shape. But the three-dimensional shape is these two interlocked pyramids, which are the star tetrahedron. So again, we can see that these shapes keep turning up even in the biological formations, because these shapes are not, they haven't been decided upon. They're not some invention or idea. They are, as we've spoken about, the form, right? They're not about, their form is their function, right? There is no addition, there's no changing. We are actually talking about the only way that these, cells could reproduce, and this chain of events, which we call life, could actually happen. So, and I think this is something that most people would agree. When it happens like this, there is a limited number of ways that this could happen. If these four spheres weren't connected, they would just spread out and they wouldn't be one unison whole. So if they're connected, they have to connect a certain way because of the shape of the sphere. They can only connect, within a certain angle and a certain space in between. And that forms these shapes that we can recognize. So these are not ancient teachings of some, weird mantra that we have to take upon because it's cultural, but these are the absolutely most fundamental, basic building blocks of reality that in every culture we have become aware of on a certain level, but they actually transcend any of these cultures or time. So I hope that's not too over dramatized and bombastic, but I really do feel this way that these shapes, these basic sacred geometrical platonic solids, are fundamental to our reality. And so we can carry on with this more and more. I don't want to go too much. If you're interested in this, it's very easy to see. Just look up cells, platonic solids or cells, pyramids, star tetrahedron, and you'll see all of this stuff. We're in the internet. So I won't bore you any longer with this because there's a lot I want to get to as well. Because this second subject is actually a little bit different, although it's obviously all part of this. I am to some degree following Drunvalo's, dare I say, timeline and chronology as unstable and irrational it may be, but I feel that there is a reason for this progression. So we're going to take a small sidestep of specifically these geometric shapes in life and talk about them once again in a different context. Now, in Drunvalo's book, the way that he's written it, and in fact the book is based on lectures, but his story, shall we say, is completely intertwined with his personal life and experiences and the information, the knowledge, the wisdom that he wants to share. And I think that in his eyes as well, these two are very much interconnected. I don't know if it seems obvious or very strange. I think maybe some people would feel one way or another. But I think the scientific approach, or let's compare it, Sitchin's approach, Sitchin doesn't talk about himself at all. I think he shares a little bit in the bio, but none of the book is about him. Everything is about his research, and that's his method. With Drunvalo, it's very, very hard, and indeed, he even says a few things. These are my thoughts. This was not information that was given to me, but based on what I know and what I experienced, this is what I think, and I don't yet know if it's true, or something to that effect. And he mentions that a lot. So it's a very different way of presenting this information, and because I want to stay true to that, it's actually a method that I find very enticing. Following the last few episodes, for those who have been listening, I've been speaking a lot about narrative and about the importance of sort of taking charge of our narrative and not abusing it or not mistaking it for, reality proof or fact, but actually embracing the fact that it is subjective, that we are all individually subjective, and that's okay, as long as we remember that. So, with this in mind, Drunvalo shares an experience that he had, which obviously is related, but I also felt very much connected to and I wanted to talk about. So, during this whole process, or the period that Drunvalo is learning all of this information over years and years, obviously, he is constantly in contact with different beings. And we spoke about this a tiny bit, I think, in the introduction. And the main character that Drunvalo, shall I say, studied under, in his words, was Thoth, the Atlantean king throughout the ages. And this is the main source of all of Drunvalo's information. But before he met Thoth, and I think also before he started his tutelage, he was, shall I say, guided by two figures whom he calls angels. And we've spoken about this as well. And whether, this episode is not about communication, inspiration, muse, etc., etc. We've spoken about that a bit, and it's not what we're going to focus upon. So for this episode, we're going to gloss over the fact that he had these two quote-unquote beings teaching him during the time. And in his words, the way that they would teach him was they would project with light these shapes into the room, as it were. and, give him these sort of tasks, these different things that he had to do. And that was the way it would work. And he would sit and sort of study the sacred geometry and the shapes and the whatever it was. And then he would sort of figure it out or find whatever he was looking for. And they would come back. And that's the process that he was going through at the time. Now, during this specific time that we're talking about, he was living in a communal house with a few friends. And the task that these angels had given him, in his words, was to find the circle and the square in Metatron's cube. So, for those who are watching this right now on the video, just to quickly remind you, the center image that you see, that is Metatron's cube. And for those who are listening, Metatron's cube is the shape that we get from the fruit of life. So when we go through all 4 patterns, which lead into each other, from the last pattern of just these 13 circles, if we connect the center of each sphere to each of the other spheres, we get this pattern, this shape called Metatron's cube. Okay, so we've mentioned it before, and I had the picture up before. And if you don't remember it, you can easily just check it out. It's a very famous. I like it. I really find it very, appealing. But anyway, that was the task that he was given. And we've actually spoken about circling the square as well. We spoke about it in the pyramid episode. This is where you have, well, there's a few different ways of doing this. Well, the one that we talked about, I think, more was having a circle, and the corners of the circle are surrounded. Sorry, a circle doesn't have. You have a square, and the corners of the square are surrounded by a circle, so that the circle touches the points of the square. Another way, as it were, to circle a circle of the square is for the circle to be trapped inside the square, and so the 4 points, midpoints of each of the square's sides touches the circle, right? I hope that's understandable, but even if not, basically the circle can enclose the square, or the square can enclose the circle. That's basically it. But there is another way of circling the square, and that is to have both the circle and the square have the same circumference. And in order to do this, they actually sort of intersect each other, as it were, at a certain point. And so this actually is the shape, when we spoke about it, of what the pyramid looked like when it had the spaceship on top of it. So if we remember, the spaceship itself was circular, was a circle. And so a look from above would see the square of the pyramid, because it's two-dimensional, because it's being looked at directly from above. And the spaceship would be the perfect circle that intersects the square exactly where to equal its circumference and of the square and the circle. Okay, I hope that was understandable. Oh, thank you, Rondon. Excellent. Yes, that's, wow. Brilliant. Brilliant. So interesting, because that actually shows the flower of life extended out to reveal the fruit of life. But there's another method to reach the fruit of life, which involves the tree of life and the flower of life. But yeah, it's cool. Sorry, for those who are listening and not seeing, we just Rondon shared a GIF, the GIF of the different shapes. So, you know what? Can you put up one of the circle and the square? This is, for those who do know enough, another reference is in Da Vinci's Man, what's it called? Venusian? I think it's Venusian Man. That square and circle are also equal in the perimeter, but they are placed differently. They're placed so that the bottom line of the circle and the square overlap. So, just to mention very quickly, there are different ways that we can circle squares, and we've mentioned that term before and the significance, etc., etc. In this specific one, we're talking about the exact same way that the pyramid and the ship would intersect, which is the circle and the sphere basically cut each other. It's sort of the circle cuts off the corners. And so it's not precise in it, or it's hard to find how to draw it exactly. Yeah, it's not that what the corners touch or that the sides all overlap. It's that it sort of intersects the square at a certain point. And so, in order to find a way to do this, this is one of those things in sacred geometry where one of the sort of, in order to find the shape, you can always do it with a compass and a ruler. You never have to measure actual distances, and this is because these shapes have a very special and specific relationship between them. Okay, that was a big introduction to talk about it, but within Drunvalo's tasks, he needed to find this shape in Metatron's cube. And in his words, a lot of these things sort of would take him, not very long, and he'd just sit and do it, and eventually, he'd come upon it, etc., etc. And he thought this would be the same, but he actually had a lot of difficulty. And he sat and really looked and looked, and he couldn't find the circle and square in Metatron's cube. And so then, in his words, he later realized that because of this, the angels felt that they needed to intervene. And so one night, Drunvalo was in his room with all of his pictures on the floor that he was sort of studying and going over. And there was a knock on the door. And I actually would like to read you Drunvalo's words to quote the book, because I feel, well, I just think that it's a very personal story, and I think that it would be interesting to share his exact phrasing instead of me trying to rephrase it in some way. You know what? Maybe I'll just share it very quickly on chat in Discord, which is what I usually try and do. So let me just put it up here. Okay. Someone knocked on the door. I opened my bedroom door, and here's this tall guy standing there. I'd never seen him before in my life. He looked kind of sheepish, and he said, I was supposed to come here to tell you some things. I asked his name and more about what he wanted. Well, he said, I was sent here by the Masons to tell you about the circle and the square. Now, obviously, this sounds very different and possibly underwhelming just in and of itself, but I really feel a connection to that feeling. A feeling where you meet someone or you find something or something happens which is just eerily, precise to the situation, to what you were feeling, to your headspace. And it can happen with songs, it can happen with lots of different things. In this case specifically, obviously, this is a much more significant occurrence. But I want to talk about it, and I want to break it down, and I want to use this example to examine this idea and this notion of synchronicity, because we have spoken about it before, but synchronicity is a very big part of my life. So I feel it's always good to talk about it, to share this this frame of mind, this way of looking at the world with others. So you know what? I can actually just see, because we're right on the half mark, and the chat has been very, very active, which is wonderful. But I wanted to have a look and see if there's anything that I need to respond to specifically. But I don't think so. It seems like Archangel and Maxine's just had a little chit chat. Okay. Wait, you're talking about the square on the Oh, Was that relation to the square? No. Okay. That's fine. No, you continue. The chat is definitely meant for all of those things, and I will continue talking about my perspective. So, I obviously started for the longest time absolutely having no uh, concept or belief in any kind of, synchronistic idea. Anything basically that happens can be interpreted as synchronistic if you want to, if you go far enough. And things have this endless chain of, cause and effect. And wherever you choose to mark the cause or to mark the effect, that's going to be subjective. So let me just reiterate that because that might have been a bit complex. We have spoken about this before, but basically, in our universe, because of our brains, because of our ability to find and identify patterns, and because of everything we've said about narrative and about belief, when we look at something, we can choose to say that was a coincidence and therefore meaningless. Equally, we can choose to say that was special and meaningful, and here's why. And often give some very good reasons as to why me, getting this thing, stopping right there, finding that piece of paper on the floor, whatever it is, was meaningful specifically to my moment. Even like I said, the example of music. I think a lot of people might relate, let me know, but to that feeling where I think maybe more when we were younger, you were listening to music on the radio and then this song came on and it was exactly what you were sort of going through and it just spoke to you directly and you felt a real strong connection that you don't feel with any song or with a book or with a film. For me, I've had a lot of films where I'm going through something or a certain period in my life and I watch a film and it just speaks directly to that subject or is exactly what. Now, obviously, often when I'm in a certain, period or headspace, I will actively or subconsciously seek out that headspace and that, way of thinking. And I'm not saying in any way that this is objectively one way or another synchronistic or not. But the idea of synchronicity, I think, is a very enticing one. It's a very positive one because it lets us um, view the world as meaningful, which is ultimately what we do and the only way we can sort of exist to a certain degree. But it also allows us to see a bigger picture, see ourselves as part of something bigger. Now, for us in our society, we are often encouraged to not see ourselves as special or, important or anything big, but as see ourselves as a small, tiny cog in this massive, massive machine that extends so far beyond our physical lives that we are all unworthy, and there's a great deal of truth in that perspective. It's an important one to have if you don't have it at all. But there's an equal and opposite perspective, which is, to me, I'm the only thing that matters in the universe. And I say that obviously having a son and realizing what the extent, but there is a level in my physical being, my body, my consciousness to a certain degree, which has a survival instinct and which, is only concerned to a certain degree with what's happening with me. And I don't mean that in a selfish way. Yeah, I hope that's understood. Within my consciousness, my conscious self, the part of me that makes decisions and thinks about things, then decides, okay, I need to listen to this, I don't need to listen to that. I really, really, really want to sleep, but my son is awake and crying, so I have to get up and be with him. But nonetheless, there is that part of me, which is the body, which is saying, this body needs sleep, or this body needs to survive. This body is the only thing that I know about, therefore, the only thing that I care about. And that perspective, I think, is what allows us to develop this narrative of I'm special. And if I'm special, then special things happen to me. Now, the big secret with synchronicity is that nobody is special or everyone is special, because this system, if it, exists in any way, is universal, is not even humanistic, because people talk about it as extending beyond just, human consciousness, as it were. So with all of us, we have to remember that if this idea of synchronicity is real, it would affect all of us. All of us would be, equally in our own synchronistic web of things happening to us and playing a part in everyone else's synchronistic web. And it's just this, the only danger is thinking, this thing happened to me, therefore I'm the only one that's special. Therefore, this doesn't happen to anyone else. Therefore, I'm the Messiah. Or vice versa, nothing special could ever happen to me because I'm not special. Ergo, anything special that happens to me is just my sort of perspective, and actually, it's not. It's a coincidence. So that's the danger when we look at these things and think that we in any way can take them as being not, equally universal. Yes, well, yeah, if everyone is special, then I'm special as well. And just because everyone else is special doesn't mean that I'm less special. I mean, technically it does because of the definition of the word, but that ignores the subjective definitions that we have for words, right? Yeah. Anyway, getting back on topic to synchronicity. When I read that story, obviously the easiest thing to say is, well, first of all, Drunvalo's making it up, right? It sounds good. It sounds amazing. Freemasons. Who doesn't want a story where the Masons sent a member to teach you secret wisdom because you needed help? That's it's a great tagline. We'd all like to have that happen to us, I think. I mean, it's mysterious. It sounds good for a story. But I thought maybe to take the time to share a personal story that I've had, and to let you know at least why I feel that there might be some truth in it. And again, you don't have to believe me, and you can think that I'm lying. And to a certain degree, I'm telling you my personal subjective truth of what I remember happened 5 years ago, and before I had a kid. So this is definitely inaccurate. What I'm sharing is not a memory of, or it is, yeah. What I'm sharing is not what happened, but it's my narrative of my memories. Okay, and I hope you enjoy it for what it is. But anyway, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you might know that part of my journey, a big part of it, was my travels to India with my now wife and then girlfriend. And that trip really changed everything. It changed me, it changed her, and it changed us. And we definitely left for that trip saying we don't know what we want to do with our life. We know that we want answers, and we're pretty much going to India to find them. And if we don't find them, then we'll see what we'll do. But right now, we had no idea going in what we were going to do or where we were going to go in life. I mean. And indeed, in India, we sort of had one place to go to when we got there because we knew we didn't want to stay in the big city. So as soon as we landed, we drove to the hotel in a taxi, and the next morning we left. We just had no interest in staying. And when we got to, oh my God, Hampi, I almost forgot. We got to Hampi and we were there for 3 weeks. And that was basically the extent of our planned trip. Now, there were a few places that we'd heard about and had names for and various, distances. But one of the places that was highly, highly recommended by many different people was this place called Karuna Farm. Now, I knew that there was an Earthship there. That was what originally drew me to the place. And some friends, I think of my wife and a few other people sort of had been there and recommended, said that they'd volunteered, and it sounded really lovely community of an organic farmers sort of, I don't know, community. But we didn't know any specifics or much more than that. And we decided to go for it, lacking any other plan. Now, I could spend a whole episode just to tell you about the 72 hours that it took us to get there, but I'll spare you those details, although it's a story in and of itself. But we eventually arrived. And when we arrived, needless to say, it was not as we had imagined. It was really raining, and it was off season, so there wasn't really anyone there. So the only ones were this one volunteer, and I think there were a few other guests, but really it felt very, very empty, very, very alien, and very unwelcoming. Now, again, this was our first experience, and we'd just come from 72 hours on the road, basically. So, our we might have been a little bit on edge, shall I say. The general train is tough. But nonetheless, we obviously decided to come and stay the night because we had nowhere else to go, and we asked them, the price, and the price, if I remember, I can't remember exactly, but it was a lot more than what we had been used to paying up until then. A lot more, like about 5 times the amount. And this really surprised us. We completely hadn't considered this, and to be honest, I mean, we did have the money, but this was more or less the beginning of our, who knows, 6-month trip. So the first 3 weeks, we want to save, and be able to do this as sparingly as possible, and this huge expense wasn't planned for at all. And so anyway, it was just one thing after another, the weather and then the food, and then the farmer, wasn't there. The garden wasn't running anymore. They didn't need any volunteers. They didn't have any space to have us. The only place that was available was really run down. It was just so many disappointments, just one after the other. And we were there. I think we were there for I can't actually remember, as I said, but we were there, I think, for a day or two, not very long. And we sort of kept talking. I think it was a little bit harder for my wife because this was sort of more of a first time. I mean, the situation was rough. Obviously, no water, no electricity. There was very, very insufficient LED lights, but not really enough to do too much. And it was in winter, it was really cold, and all of the wood was far, far too damp to start a fire. I'll never forget, I stood with a lighter over a piece of cardboard for about 2 minutes till I nearly burnt my hand on the lighter, and it wouldn't light. The piece of cardboard just wouldn't. That was such a strong symbol for me about this. Anyway, all I'm trying to tell you is that going into this, we really had a lot to get over. Yeah, a lot of disappointment. But speaking of that feeling before, speaking of that very difficult feeling to describe, something in both of us, and thank goodness we both felt it. We felt it was important for us to be there. I don't know why, I don't know how. The friends who recommended didn't mention it like that at all. I think that on season, when it's not the rainy season, it's a glorious place to be. Our experience was so different from everything that we'd heard. It wasn't that. It was this feeling inside where, yes, we can go, we can find somewhere else, but we need to give this a chance. There's something here, something that isn't in the food or the drink or the smoke, but something, in the air, or should I say more so in the ground. This is a very, very high mountain with a gorgeous view off the side, but it was really, I can't remember the elevation, but the city itself is a mountain city, and then this farm is slightly outside of that. And yeah, I mean, I could give it lots of different words, but at the time, all we said, and we really said it like that, was, I don't know why, but I feel there's a reason for us to be there. And then we went, I can't remember when it was, the next day, whatever, to the restaurant. and we wanted to talk to the actual sort of young hippie, I don't know what to call him, farmer who was there, um, and introduce ourselves and see if he needs volunteers on his farm, which he had a place, nearby. We didn't quite understand anything, but when we told them we wanted to volunteer, and they said there was nowhere to volunteer, they didn't need volunteers. They said, well, there's this guy, maybe he needs something, go and talk to him. We were very, dejected at this point. We'd had a very rough night, etc., etc. But we thought, we're already here. Before we go, we might as well ask if he needs volunteers to work on the land. That could work out perfectly. It could solve our problems. Let's have a look. We went. He was in a very engaged conversation, very passionately talking about nutrients in the soil and their effect on diet. And so we said, okay, well, wait. This was, by the way, this was before I learned Go. So this was when I still played chess. We'd play chess together. So we took out a board and started playing. And the time passed. And I think we waited for about 10, 15, 20 minutes. And then when nothing changed and he was still pretty much talking one-sided, we decided, well, we'll just start a game. And then we were so engrossed in the game and we assumed, oh, well, he's just going to, we won't meet him today. We'll meet him maybe some other time or whatever. And then after he'd sort of gone and paid, came to us and he said, hey, you're the Israeli couple who were looking for me? And we just looked at each other stunned. We'd know, what? Yes, yeah. Okay, you want to come up for a cup of tea and we'll talk? Okay. And we really weren't expecting that. We were expecting, I don't know what we were expecting, but hey, we're, a couple, we just came here, we want to volunteer, we heard you might need something, oh, well, okay, let me check, something along those lines. That the way that it happened. Now, obviously, from his point of view, right, clearly, looking back, and I do want to point this out because this is equally valid, he was having a conversation. Right, he obviously saw that we'd arrived at some point. He knew everyone on the farm. There's not many people there. He knew exactly who we were. We stood out amazingly. And he just finished talking because he wasn't in any rush, as everyone there, isn't. And paid and came to tell us to come at his house to talk. So in his eyes, there was nothing, I'm sure, there was nothing special about that interaction. But for us, and being so engrossed in the chess game, not noticing, and just suddenly having this, figure appear and talk directly to us, who we'd just given up on and assumed he'd going to go home and we'll talk to him some other time, and say, hey, I already know that you're looking for me, and come, let's have a drink. It was just very magical. So again, for us, it was a very different experience. But that feeling of, well, I guess if you haven't heard this story, you might want to know what happened next. Now I suddenly realize. But basically, we spent 3 hours talking to him. At the end of it, we had established our relationship, which is still strong today. We're still in touch. I just spoke to him quite recently, and all of our lives, my wife and I, changed from that moment. He allowed us to have a place to go through this experience and have everything that we need. And we basically went through a life-changing experience of finding, working with nature and working in sustainability or agrarianism. Was what we wanted to dedicate our lives to. And basically this is, we've moved to Portugal with our son. So as far as I'm concerned, that's the biggest, dedication that we could show. So I swear, this is again, my narrative, my memory, etc., etc. But for me, that was the moment when he turned to us and said, and it's funny because in his perspective, and this is his story, so I'm not going to give details, and B, I hope, I'm going to try and be very protect his privacy, but it is important for me to share that in his perspective, he felt that same sort of special connection with us from his side. So in his side of things, he was going through his own things in life. And for him, our presence was exactly what he needed. So I hope that's amorphic and vague enough to protect. It might not be enough to understand, but all we need to remember is that this isn't, calling this synchronistic, calling it serendipitous, calling it a coincidence is giving it different meaning in our lives. And I don't in any way think that one of those is objectively truer or more true. For me, subjectively, the idea that we went through so many things that led us to that place and had to both sort of be exposed to people who said, hey, I visited this place called Karuna Farm when I was in India. It was really awesome. You should go check it out. And having, being interested in Earthships, because really, if it wasn't for the Earthship, I don't think we would have gone there. It was the combination of I really wanted to see an Earthship, my wife really trusted her friend's opinion, and they were both the same. This place, which obviously, again, it is a famous place. Lots and lots and lots of people visit there and recommend it, and this is not this hidden little thing that we found a map for. I could definitely tell this story in a much more illustrious way if I were making it up. But nonetheless, like going through that train, 72 hours, going down the mountain to this, hid away thing, and then facing the fact that this is A, very expensive, and every day that we're there, we're paying, B, off season, meaning almost constant rain or grey, no sun nearly at all, nobody really there. So like all we're hearing to this day, I'm constantly hearing about people that who lived there or, and we just never saw because they weren't there for that season. The exact time that we were there, everybody leaves. And the only people who stay are this guy that we met, one other guy who's there year round. But honestly, like almost no, there's a few, but almost everyone leaves. So it was all of these things, and we did feel, I don't know why, but we felt that there was a reason that they were there, that there was still more to see, that we couldn't leave yet, despite the hardships. And boy, did it pay off, as it were. So, to wrap all this up, because I can see that we are nearing the end of the episode, if we go back to the original story that Drunvalo shared of how he viewed things, definitely, this sounds very grandiose, having a meeting where you decide, how did they hear about Drunvalo? What was the link between the Freemasons, which is very, very different, and Drunvalo? And, this is obviously a very convoluted story that would be very difficult to prove or very difficult to disprove, very difficult to verify, and those are always the most suspicious stories. But nonetheless, if I was thinking, okay, let's assume that everything else that Drunvalo has said, we accept, because obviously if not, then this is very far in the story already. But if this is a person who is in touch with these beings who aren't from this, the same physical realm as we are, who are teaching him sacred geometry for some reason, and if the reason is to, awaken humanity or raise our consciousness or whatever you want to say, then how far-fetched is it that these same spiritual groups actually share their roots with each other? Or, for example, that this web of, intricate synchronicity is not only this sort of random, human, like, just, we coming across a farmer and each of us sharing our world perspective and getting close to each other, but actually even more, guided or managed, whatever you want to say, but actually being looked at from that larger perspective, where all of these different things that are happening, all of these different people, all of these different interactions are actually adding up in one way or another. And we've spoken about this in our recent episodes as well, when we talk about the brotherhood, the Tat Brotherhood, because the secret societies in ancient Egypt were literally, and as they claim, put there to become involved and to help shape and guide humanity and culture. And the way they would do it is not just, they didn't have a school to teach these things out in public. They had a secret school where they would teach the initiates, but when it came to interaction with society at large, it was clear that a more covert method would be much more suitable, I think. And I think that when we look at this method of synchronicity, that's exactly the kind of framework that it fits. The fact that if we really wanted, to maintain free will, to have people go about their daily lives and still inject, as it were, this spiritual, this meaningful, this purposeful element to things to help guide people along their way, it seems very natural to me that this would be the system that would come. A system where, if you want, you can see everything as a coincidence and meaningless or by chance. But if you want, you can see it all as part of this, interconnected web of purposeful direction, as it were. Anyway, that's more or less the way that I view things. I'd be interested in chat to hear. Have you got any... oh my gosh, we've got 3 minutes left. Okay, well, with the last 3 minutes, if you're a quick typer, do you have any stories of serendipity, synchronicity, coincidences? Just because for me, for the longest time, I didn't believe any of it. Really, really, really. When people told me it's easy, all you have to say is... that was a coincidence. There's that literally, you don't need to prove anymore. That's, you know what I mean? To a certain extent, that's factually true. Yes, it was a coincidence. I'm not denying that these things are coincidences. I'm simply saying coincidences can be meaningful. And obviously that might change the definition of a coincidence, but I think we can, or I, at least in my perspective, see both of those equally valid. As it were. When you travel overseas, I had a very interesting theory about that exactly, that when we go into a rigorous schedule where we're doing the same thing, we've got these clear destinations, I'm going to drive to this place, I get out, I get in the door, I get out, I get back into my car, I drive home. We don't allow for any of these synchronicities to happen. And then when you're traveling and you're like, oh, where will I go? Oh, maybe I'll go down this alley. Oh, I just met someone new. Where are you going? Oh, you're going to this park tomorrow. Well, suddenly you allow these little synchronicities to happen to you. Yeah, exactly. When you move. And I think just generally connections with people, like any person that I've had a connection with, which was positive, I feel in a way, is part of this connection, is part of this group of people that I'm surrounded by, that I'm growing with. But also that there are these very meaningful, specific times and places where they can happen. So yeah, definitely. And here for me, moving. I think becoming a parent lowers the amount of synchronicity in your life. But then it lowers most things. Oh my gosh, look at the time. Okay, you share your thoughts in chat. I would really love to see you, but I've suddenly noticed that with all of this, we've actually come to the end of the episode. So I've been Oleg. It's been a pleasure. Have a good one.